In 1939, a surgical procedure was performed to treat coronary artery disease. The procedure was called mammary artery ligation. Basically, what the surgeons did was cut the artery that runs down the chest wall. This procedure was thought to improve blood flow to the heart and was performed for 20 years as a routine treatment for heart disease. 20 years later, the surgery was compared to a sham operation. Patients received a surgical cut on their chest, but the artery was never actually touched. The medical community was shocked when the patients receiving the sham procedure had the same success rates as those who actually had the intervention. The surgeons had to accept the fact that the surgery they had been performing for the last 20 years was no better than a placebo. The word placebo is used to describe any form of treatment where patients are led to believe that they are experiencing a beneficial procedure or receiving a curative agent, while in reality, they are given something that has no known healing properties. A more recent study of sham surgery was conducted by a group of orthopedic surgeons. The condition under study was knee pain. Patients were placed in 3 different groups. 2 of the groups received an actual surgical intervention, and the 3rd group received a sham procedure. Again, the results showed that people in the placebo group did as well as the people in the treatment group. The knee pain in all 3 groups improved equally. In both of these sham surgery studies, it is important to note that patients were truly led to believe that they were undergoing surgery. Patients were placed under surgical anesthesia. An actual incision was made, and they recovered in the hospital. Needless to say, these kinds of experiments are not being done today. The charged elements of going to the hospital and having a procedure increase the placebo response because the participant believes they are getting a real surgery. But the sham surgery is basically a fake operation. All the steps are identical to the real procedure, with the exception of the actual therapeutic intervention. While one group received surgery and one didn't, both groups of people believed they received treatment. They believed they received treatment. And it was revealed that the key is belief. Over the past 23 lectures, we have seen how the science of natural healing gives us powerful tools to achieve optimal health. Now it appears that the secret ingredient is actually you. At the end of the day, you are your own best medicine. Jerome Frank was a physician. He was also a psychotherapy researcher, a folk healer, and even an anti-nuclear activist. He wrote a book in 1961 called Persuasion and Healing. Dr. Frank's work sought to answer the question, what makes people heal? And from his work comes the following conclusions. Dr. Frank believed that healing required the patient and physician to share the belief that healing would occur. Healing also requires an emotionally charged setting and a confiding relationship. But Dr. Frank did not stop there. He went on to say that healing also requires some kind of ritual surrounding the healing event. Remember the ritual surrounding the sham surgery? The patients really believed they were having an operation. In this case, the surgery was the ritual. In addition, Dr. Frank said that healing requires hope. When I think of Dr. Frank's principles of what makes people heal, I am reminded of my own medical practice. And I can't help but to think of my patient, Herb. Herb was a senior corporate executive who had lots of medical problems. Herb had really severe heart disease. Herb came to see me on his 85th birthday and asked me if I would write a clearance for him to go and have surgery. When I asked Herb why he needed to have surgery, he lifted his right hand to show me that he had damage to a tendon. Herb was unable to lift his third digit, so it became very hard for him to write. I really didn't want to send Herb to surgery. He had so many medical problems, and I was concerned about the anesthesia. I was afraid that Herb's surgery might result in a complication. So I asked Herb if he would like for me to do a healing touch treatment. And he said yes. For 20 minutes, he and I remained quiet as I performed healing touch on his upper extremity. Herb left the appointment with a smile. I gave him a big hug, and I also gave him his surgical clearance. 3 days later, I was really surprised to receive a call from Herb. He said, "Guess what, Dr. G? My surgery was canceled. You cured me." Now, I don't believe for 1 minute that I cured Herb. Like the surgical procedure, seeing a physician in the office can also be a very emotionally charged situation. I learned a long time ago that even the handing of a prescription to a patient will have an effect on their response to that medication. Let me give you an example. When I was a younger physician, I would give a patient a medication and I would say, "Why don't we try this medication? Let's see how you do." Even though I knew intellectually that this was the best medication at the time for the problem. I subsequently realized that if I believed that something really was going to work, I needed to put my energy into that prescription and hand it to the patient in a different way. So now when I hand a patient a prescription, I say, this is going to work. What bigger ritual do we have that happens thousands of times a day in hospitals and physicians' offices all over the world? The act of handing a patient a prescription and telling them that it will make them well sets in motion the patient's own intent to heal. With Herb, the healing touch treatment was the ritual. And I will never know what healed Herb's hand, whether his healing was from healing touch, placebo, or the hug that I gave him at the end of the appointment. And I don't really need to know. All I know is he never had a problem with that hand again. Now, Herb was not a patient that I had seen for the first time. Herb and I had a very special relationship. Herb had been my patient for many years. We had a lot of history together. There is no doubt that we had bonded. I loved him as a human being. And I know that he knew that. And I was really torn that day because I didn't want him to have to go and have a surgery. I didn't want him to potentially have a complication. The healing touch treatment was as much for me as it was for him because I felt like I needed to do something for Herb. To me, that's the nature of the patient-physician relationship. But that doesn't always go on in a medical office. What happens if a physician is not empathetic, or there is not this type of close, confiding relationship? A study was published in the Journal of Affective Disorders to evaluate the impact of the psychotherapist on treating patients with depression. Their objective was not to evaluate the depression treatment as much as the psychotherapist. People were placed into two groups. One group received a placebo, and the second, an active drug. The difference was the therapist. What they found was, of course, amazing. Those people who had a caring, empathetic therapist, even though they got the placebo, did better than the individuals who had a less caring therapist, even though those individuals received an active drug. A similar study was conducted to evaluate the impact of a physician's empathy on the ability to control patients' diabetes and cholesterol. Physicians were ranked as having either high, moderate, or low empathy. No surprises. Those physicians ranked as having the highest empathy had the most success controlling their patients' diabetes and cholesterol. And what I have seen in my practice is my patients frequently come in and say to me, "Dr. G, I lost 10 pounds for you." And I laugh to myself because it makes me happy. And of course, I'm glad they improved their weight, but it's for them as well. But the fact that they would do it for me really touches my heart. Irving Kirsch, director of the program in placebo studies at Harvard Medical School, believes that all responses are based on expectancy. In essence, what we expect will indeed occur. Let's look at one more fascinating study. In 2002, a study was published in which 17 men with major depression were randomized to receive an active placebo or the antidepressant medication Prozac. PET scans of the brain were performed to look at brain activity. The PET scans were to evaluate different brain patterns associated with different emotions and psychiatric illnesses. The patients were scanned before and after the study. Similar brain changes were seen in the placebo and medication group. PET scans where areas of the brain lit up were the same. The authors concluded, and I quote, "It is therefore emphasized that administration of placebo is not absence of treatment, just an absence of active medication." We have seen the power of ritual and expectation to bring about healing. That's what these studies are telling us. But what happens if a patient believes that they will develop an illness, or if a patient believes that they will die? This is referred to as nocebo. In medicine, a nocebo reaction or response refers to harmful, unpleasant, or undesirable effects after receiving a medication or treatment. A nocebo response is due to the subject's pessimistic beliefs and expectation that the placebo will produce negative consequences. I remember once, when I was a young physician, I offered a patient a medication for his diabetes. And he quickly told me that he didn't want to take that medication. And I quote, "Doc, I don't want to take that medicine. It's going to kill me." He didn't really know anything about the drug. He had never even heard about this medicine. So I insisted he take the medication. I told him it was one of the best medicines on the market. Well, he took the medication and had a profound allergic reaction. Fortunately for my patient, he was fine in the end. But this taught me, as a physician, a really good lesson. Again, I am not certain whether he actually had an allergic reaction to the drug, or whether he manifested the allergic reaction by truly believing that he was going to die. Or maybe he even had an inner knowing, what I call your own inner physician, that clued him in on his own vulnerability. Either way, I now have the greatest respect for my patient's intuition. Is there any research to validate the concept that what we believe can have negative consequences? Let's take a look. The Framingham Heart Study, directed by the National Heart Institute, enrolled 5,290 men and women from Framingham, Massachusetts, between the ages of 30 and 62. Thousands of papers have been published from the Framingham Heart Study. The purpose of this research was to follow these patients over a long period of time to identify factors associated with coronary artery disease. The researchers were surprised to find that women who believed they were prone to heart disease at the start of the study, prone to heart disease right from the beginning, were almost 4 times more likely to die as those with similar risk factors who did not hold this belief. In the case of the Framingham Heart Study, these women believed they were going to get sick. Belief is not simply thought. It goes much deeper than that, and it's much more complex. Belief can best be defined as the certainty that comes from accepting what we think is true in our minds, as well as what we feel to be true in our hearts. Belief is at the very core of our being. The women in the Framingham study were convinced that they would get heart disease. These women focused on what they believed to be true, that they would get heart disease. Could it be that they actually manifested this reality? Is it possible that we create the things in life that mirror our own thoughts and feelings? And more importantly, what happens if we change that thinking? What happens when we bring in a new perspective? Affirmations are a way of doing just that. An affirmation is a declaration that something is true. It is not about just saying words. It is about knowing with your mind and believing in your heart what you are saying. Let me give you an example. I am healed is a positive affirmation. It is not the past tense or the future tense. It's not I'm going to be healed. It is I am healed. I am whole. The healing happens right there in the present moment. So we have seen that stress can make us sick. But now we know that what we believe can also make us well. David Creswell, in 2007, conducted a study to evaluate the effect of affirmations through expressive writing in breast cancer survivors. When the essays written by the women were analyzed, the author concluded that women whose writings were affirmative experienced fewer negative symptoms and a better health outcome. When I think of the power of affirmations, I have to tell one more story about my patient, Harry. I have been Harry's physician for at least 15 years. And he came to see me about 15 years ago and was having some shortness of breath. And I did a full evaluation, even a coronary angiogram. And I told Harry that I thought it would be best if he has a bypass. And Harry said to me, bypass? I said, yes, open heart surgery. And he looked at me and he said, Dr. G, I'm not having a bypass. I have things to do. And this is exactly what he said. He said, I have 6 bunny rabbits at home that I have to feed. And every Friday I have to meet my friends to fly my model planes. I'm not having a bypass. And then Harry said, Dr. G, I don't need a bypass. I stepped back a bit, and I thought eventually I will talk Harry into this bypass surgery. So I took his angiogram to what we call cardiology conference, and I had the entire angiogram reviewed with my colleagues. And 20 out of 20 cardiologists in the room said Harry needed a bypass. So when Harry came back to see me, I said, Harry, the entire committee, every cardiologist we have says you need a bypass, and I agree. And he looked at me again and said, Dr. G, I don't need a bypass. But it came from a really deep place. This wasn't just saying words. He meant it. Well, you know how this story ends, because it's 15 years later, and Harry still hasn't had his bypass. Throughout the science of natural healing, we have discussed a new paradigm of health. We have concluded that prevention is the best intervention. The new paradigm treats the whole person, body, mind, emotions, and spirit. The new paradigm gets to the underlying cause of disease and strengthens the soil in which we live. We have explored the big picture that connects the health of the planet to the choices that we make every day as individuals. And we have zoomed in on tiny molecules like vitamin D, revealing their importance to our bodies and to our mind. We have talked about nutrition, exercise, meditation, and service. We have examined the evidence that supports the health benefits of love, of forgiveness, and the health benefits of connection. And we concluded that the W-E in wellness is we. And today, once again, we've seen the power of thought. Thoughts we've discovered really can make us sick. But if they can make us sick, our thoughts can also make us well. There are many paths to healing, and the path may be different for each of us. But whatever path you take, remember this: you have the power to be your own best medicine. It is my personal hope that the science of natural healing provides you with all the necessary tools, science, and wisdom to start your healing journey. Remember, information leads to knowledge, but practice will lead to transformation.